I'm Hannah Reed, 33 years old, and every Thanksgiving of my life has felt like walking onto a stage I never auditioned for. The table gleams with polished silver, my mother floats between the kitchen and dining room like a director, and my father's voice fills every corner of the house. There's laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of roasted turkey, and underneath it all the same quiet script we've followed for years. My sister Lauren plays the star. I play the supporting act who brings the extra chairs from the garage. But this year, as my father lifted his glass and said, "Your sister just bought a gorgeous home," I smiled instead of shrinking. He didn't know it yet, but one sentence from me would rewrite the entire evening. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground in a room that never saw your worth. I grew up in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, where lawns were trimmed, neighbors waved from porches, and image was everything. My parents built their lives around respectability, Sunday church perfect report cards, the right friends, and the right kind of success. Dad ran a small construction company that everyone in town admired. Mom organized every dinner like it was a formal event. From as early as I can remember, I understood that the Reed family reputation was a fragile thing you never let crack in public. Lauren learned that lesson too, but she learned how to make it shine. I learned how to hold it steady. Lauren was the child who sparkled in every room. Straight-A student cheer captain, college sweetheart who turned into a lawyer's wife with a picture-perfect life. When she walked through a door, people noticed. When I did, I carried her coat. I didn't resent her, not really, but I could never forget how the air shifted whenever her name came up. Lauren just got promoted. Lauren's having her first baby. Even when she wasn't around, she filled the room. And me, I was the quiet one, steady, but forgettable. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday dinner, every church picnic, Dad would find a way to praise her, and the rest of us would play along. After college, I stayed in Columbus and worked my way through a string of marketing jobs, the kind that didn't make headlines but paid the rent. My parents never said they were disappointed, but they didn't have to. It was in the way Dad asked still at that little firm, or how Mom said, "Maybe someday you'll find something stable." When I finally started freelancing, they called it a phase. The truth was I was good at what I did. I just didn't talk about it. I built slow, steady relationships with clients and learned to make quiet success look effortless. But in our family, quiet never counted. By the time I hit 30, Thanksgiving had turned into a performance I could lip-sync without thinking. The tablecloths were the same cream linen, the china, the same pattern from my parents' wedding, the same seats assigned year after year. Dad carved the turkey like a general addressing his troops. Mom refilled glasses that weren't empty, and Lauren made small talk about open-concept kitchens and preschool wait lists. I'd nod, smile, and ask polite questions, pretending the comments about catching up didn't sting. The older I got, the clearer it became to them my life was unfinished because it wasn't displayed. But last year, something changed. I skipped the dinner, claiming a deadline, and stayed home in my apartment instead. I remember sitting cross-legged on the couch with takeout pad thai, watching old holiday movies while snow drifted past the window. It was quiet, no laughter, no comparison, no tension, and for the first time, I felt peace instead of guilt. In that stillness, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for their permission to be proud of myself. I started working not for applause, but for ownership. By spring, my client list had doubled. By summer, I'd signed 2 retainer contracts that changed everything. And by the end of that year, I did something no one in my family saw coming. I bought my own home. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a sturdy colonial with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post about it online. I painted the kitchen myself, replaced the light fixtures, and filled the rooms slowly, each decision mine alone. For the first time, I didn't need an audience to make it real. I knew what I'd built even if no one else did. That quiet confidence stayed with me humming in the background of every day. So when this year's Thanksgiving invitation arrived, I hesitated. I could have said no, again avoided the same polished routine, the same questions about when I'd catch up. But something told me to go, not to prove anything, but to finally stand in that room as the woman I had become. The night I drove home, the sky was sharp and clear. The the kind of November chill that smells like wood smoke and change. I parked outside the old family house, straightened my burgundy sweater, and walked toward the porch light that had guided me since childhood. Inside, laughter floated down the hall, the same voices, the same rhythm. Only this time, I wasn't coming to play my old part. I was walking into a story that was about to be rewritten. By the time I stepped through the front door that evening, the familiar warmth and scent of roasted turkey wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't missed. The house looked exactly as it had every Thanksgiving before soft yellow light, the hum of voices, the faint clatter of serving spoons against porcelain. From the kitchen, Mom called out my name with that cheerful tone she used when guests were near. When I walked in, she looked me over quickly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my sweater and tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You look nice, sweetheart," she said, before glancing toward the dining room. "Everyone's already seated. Go say hello." The table gleamed like a showroom display. Candles flickered along the center, and crystal glasses caught the light like tiny flames. Dad sat at the head, carving the turkey with deliberate care, while Lauren held court beside him, radiant as ever. She looked up when she saw me smiling wide enough for the whole room to notice. "Hannah." "You made it." Her husband Ethan gave a polite nod, without lifting his glass. Aunt Marjorie leaned over to pat my hand as I sat down. "We were wondering if you'd show this year," she said with a teasing grin. I smiled back, settling into the far end of the table next to Abby, who whispered softly, "It's good to see you. You look amazing." The conversation flowed like a well-rehearsed play. Dad's stories, Mom's gentle laughter, Lauren's effortless charm. It all had a rhythm I could feel in my bones. Between bites of cranberry sauce and spoonfuls of mashed potatoes, I caught the glances that flickered my way, kind, polite, and curious, but never too curious. I had missed a few holidays, and my absence had been noted, but not enough to ask about. When Dad's company came up, Lauren leaned forward with practiced interest, asking about contracts and expansion plans. I listened quietly as he spoke with pride about growth markets and the power of consistency. That was his favorite phrase. I'd learned it early: consistency, presentation, perfection. The family rules that shaped everything we did. By dessert, the tone began to shift. The wine glasses refilled themselves, laughter loosened, and the performance grew louder. Dad leaned back, napkin tucked at his collar, eyes glinting with satisfaction. "Well," he said, lifting his glass, "your sister has some big news." Lauren placed a hand on his arm, feigning surprise. "Dad, you don't have to." But he waved her off, grinning toward the rest of us. She just closed on a beautiful new home. 4 bedrooms, wrap-around porch, all the bells and whistles. The table erupted in polite admiration. "That's wonderful," Aunt Marjorie said. "You've always been ahead of the curve," Lauren Mom added with a proud smile. Then came the part I had been expecting, as predictable as the turkey itself. Dad turned his gaze toward me, the same grin softening into a teasing smirk. "So, Hannah," he said, "when will you catch up?" The words hung there light enough to sound like a joke, but sharp enough to cut. The room waited for my usual polite deflection. I felt Abby shift beside me, her fork still. Lauren tilted her head, curious, ready to enjoy the familiar exchange. I met Dad's eyes, steady and calm, the way I'd learned to steady my breath before big client meetings. "I did," I said evenly, my voice quiet but clear. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was brittle, like glass holding its breath. Dad blinked once, his smile faltering. Lauren's fork hovered in midair, her lips parting just slightly. Even Mom paused mid-pour of sparkling cider, the liquid trembling at the rim of the glass. I didn't say another word. I let the quiet stretch until it filled the space between every clink and exhale. It was the kind of silence that made people look at each other instead of at me. Dad gave a short laugh, low and uncertain. "Well," he said, waving his hand dismissively, "that's cryptic." I looked at him, still calm. "It's not," I said. "You asked a question and I answered it." He shifted in his seat. his expression somewhere between amusement and discomfort. "So what? What's this about? You've bought a house?" I reached for my water glass, took a slow sip, and nodded. "Yes," I said simply. "About a year ago." Mom's voice broke the quiet. "A year?" she asked, brows lifting. "Why didn't you tell us I met her eyes? It never came up." The words landed without heat, only truth. Across the table, Lauren blinked, as if running through old memories to find the moment she'd missed it. There wasn't one. I had kept my world private, not from spite, but from peace. Trevor cleared his throat, eager to steady the air. "That's great, Hannah," he said politely. "Where is it?" "About 20 minutes from here," I replied. Dad chuckled again, his tone slightly forced. "What's the square footage on this mystery house?" "Just over 4,000, I said. The room inhaled all at once. Aunt Marjorie let out a soft, "My goodness." Lauren's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to me. "That's a lot," she said quietly. Maybe I answered, "But it's paid in full." No one spoke. It wasn't tension, it was recalibration. I could almost see the math forming in their eyes, rewriting the version of me they had all believed. Dad's jaw shifted. "Paid in full," he repeated. "No mortgage." I nodded once. "Every cent." Lauren's husband murmured, "Wow," before catching himself. "I've been building this for years," I said quietly, "just not publicly." The silence that followed felt different now. Not awkward, just honest. Lauren forced a smile. "That's really nice, Hannah," she said, her tone dipping into the kind of sweetness people use when they're unsure how to respond. "Buying a house is a big deal. You didn't want to share that with your family." I looked at her and spoke gently. "You mean the family that only ever asks how close I am to being like you?" Her smile faltered. I didn't raise my voice or add weight to the words. I didn't need to. The truth stood fine on its own. Dad leaned forward, fingers tapping the table. "What kind of work are you doing now? Still freelancing?" "No," I said. "I run my own consultancy now, 6 clients under retainer." Mom's voice was almost a whisper. 6. I nodded. "I've been financially independent for a while." The words hung there, quiet and certain. For the first time, Dad didn't have a quick comeback. He reached for his wine eyes, distant thinking. I could sense him measuring what to say next. When the tension shifted again, Lauren's husband spoke before he could. "Well, Lauren's house is a great investment," he said, forcing a laugh. "Good neighborhood, good schools." Lauren nodded quickly, as if reclaiming the lead. I smiled politely. "That's great," I said. "Although technically it's not her name on the deed." The air stilled. Lauren blinked. "Excuse me, it's just what the records show," I said simply. Ethan signed the mortgage. "It's public information." Ethan's face flushed. "We're married," he said quickly. "It's our house." "Of course," I said, "but banks care about signatures, not captions." Dad's hand lifted halfway as if to stop the conversation. "Okay," he said. "That's enough." I stayed calm, folding my napkin neatly on my lap. "It's not out of hand," I said. "It's just honest." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger this time, but doubt. A quiet, unsteady kind of realization. Lauren crossed her arms, her voice tight. "I never asked to be compared." "Neither did I said, "but it happened anyway. Every holiday, every conversation." The room had gone still, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the only sound. "I built something real," I said. I just didn't need an audience to clap for me. No one argued. Not yet. But the quiet between us felt different now, less performance, more truth. The air seemed to shift, and for the first time in years, I saw my father looking at me not as the daughter who fell behind, but as someone he might have underestimated. And that was the moment the night began to change. No one spoke for a long moment after my words settled. The silverware on the table gleamed beneath the chandelier untouched, while the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence no one knew how to break. Dad stared down at his plate like he was trying to find his footing in a room that suddenly tilted beneath him. Lauren's eyes stayed fixed on mine, guarded but uncertain, and Mom's fingers twisted the edge of her napkin as if smoothing it could fix what had just been said. I could feel every pair of eyes waiting for someone else to move first. It was Aunt Marjorie who finally spoke, her voice thin but steady. "Well," she said, clearing her throat, "this is certainly unexpected." Dad forced a chuckle, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "It's not a competition," he said, looking around the table as though to reclaim the tone. "We're all proud of both our girls." But the words hung limp, too practiced to carry any weight. Lauren's hand brushed the stem of her glass. "You didn't have to make it sound like a secret," she said softly, not quite looking at me. "It wasn't a secret," I answered. "It just wasn't yours to announce." The air shifted again, quieter now, less about shock and more about recalibration. I could almost feel the pieces rearranging in everyone's minds, the daughter they'd underestimated sitting right across from them, unshaken, no longer asking to be seen. Dad leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. "You've clearly done well," he said, his tone polite but edged with something else. "But I don't understand why you'd keep it from us. Families share things like that." I met his eyes. "Families also notice," I said quietly. No one asked. That landed harder than I meant it to. Mom looked up, her lips parting slightly. "That's not fair," she said, her voice breaking a little. "We've always cared." I nodded slowly. "You cared about what looked good. You cared about Lauren's milestones, her pictures, her promotions. I don't remember anyone asking what I was working toward. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words carried their own calm truth. Ethan shifted beside Lauren, trying to bridge the gap. "It's easy to misread intentions," he said gently. "I'm sure your dad didn't mean to make you feel left out." I looked at him briefly. "It's not about being left out," I said. "It's about never being let in." Lauren exhaled sharply, setting her fork down with more force than she intended. "You make it sound like we ignored you on purpose." I shook my head. "You didn't have to do it on purpose. It just happened over and over until it became normal." The conversation rippled down the table in soft murmurs. Aunt Marjorie whispered something to Mom that I couldn't catch, and Abby's eyes flicked toward me, worried but encouraging. I reached for my glass, letting the stem rest between my fingers as I spoke again. "Every year we sit here and talk about the same things. Promotions, houses, vacations. And every year I answer the same questions. Am I still freelancing, still figuring things out? But no one ever asked what that actually meant. You didn't want the answer unless it fit the picture you already had." Dad's hand went still against the tablecloth. "That's not true," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I looked at him, quiet but steady. "Then name one time you asked what I was proud of." His mouth opened, then closed again. He reached for his glass instead. The weight of the moment sat heavy on everyone's shoulders. Lauren leaned back, crossing her arms. "You make it sound like we've been cruel," she said. "Maybe you could have spoken up sooner." I met her gaze. Maybe I said. But it shouldn't have been my job to beg for a place at my own table. For a long time, no one spoke. I could hear the faint pop of the fire in the next room and the creak of the chandelier's chain as it swayed slightly overhead. Mom's eyes had turned glossy, and her voice when it came was barely a whisper. I didn't realize she said. "I know," I replied gently. "That's the problem." Dad shifted again as though trying to anchor the moment back into familiar territory. "You're being too hard on your mother," he said, his tone tight. "She's done everything for this family." "I know she has," I said. "That's not what this is about. It's about being seen, not being perfect." The words weren't angry. They were steady, the kind that leave no room for argument. Lauren pushed her chair back slightly, her voice rising a notch. "You think I asked for any of this?" she said, the edges of her composure fraying. "I never told Dad to brag about me. I didn't put myself on a pedestal." I shook my head. "No, but you didn't step down from it either." The look she gave me was sharp, then softened, as though the truth of it had found her before she could argue. For a long while she said nothing. The conversation fell into stillness again, heavy and unfamiliar. The clinking of forks had stopped, the laughter had drained from the walls, and what remained was raw and real. I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years I had walked into this house braced for comparison. That night, I didn't need to prove anything. The truth had already done the work. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as it touched my wrist. "Hannah," she said softly. "I'm sorry if we made you feel small. We were proud of you in our own way." I met her eyes, kind but honest. "Then maybe it's time you start showing it." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was fragile, almost tender. It felt like the air before rain, heavy but promising change. Dad leaned back in his chair, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even respect, but it was tangled with years of habit he couldn't yet let go. "You always were quiet," he said almost to himself. "Maybe too quiet." I smiled faintly. "I didn't stop talking," I said. "You just stopped listening." That was when Aunt Marjorie cleared her throat again this time, sounding less sure of herself. "Families go through things," she said, her tone careful, "but we're lucky when the truth comes out before it's too late." Her words seemed to hang there, the kind of simple wisdom that settled without demanding a response. Abby nodded slightly beside me, offering a small, knowing smile. For the first time that night, no one tried to fill the space with noise. The conversation didn't rush back to normal. It couldn't. Something had shifted too deeply. I folded my napkin neatly on my lap, tracing the edge with my thumb as I breathed in the quiet. The candle flames flickered, reflected in the silverware, and I could feel the weight of years loosening just slightly. Across the table, Lauren stared down at her plate, her fork untouched. When she finally looked up, her voice was softer. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said. "I guess I thought you liked keeping to yourself." I met her gaze. "I liked peace," I said. "But peace isn't the same as silence." Lauren nodded once, eyes glistening but steady. The sound of rain began to tap faintly against the kitchen window, slow and rhythmic, as though marking the end of something long overdue. Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, whispering something I couldn't hear. Dad stayed quiet, his hands folded in front of him like he was still deciding whether to hold on or let go. The clock in the hallway chimed softly, breaking the stillness. I took a slow breath, pushing my chair back just enough to ease the tension in my shoulders. "I think I've said what I needed to," I said quietly. No one tried to stop me. No one interrupted. The storm outside deepened, low thunder rumbling in the distance, and I knew this night would echo long after I walked out that door. The night after Thanksgiving, the house was so quiet, I could hear the furnace clicking through the vents. I lay awake in the guest room, the same room I'd slept in as a teenager, when the wallpaper was still pale yellow and the dresser smelled faintly of lemon polish. Down the hall I could hear muffled voices, Mom's low tone, Dad's sharper one cutting through. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The rhythm was familiar. They were trying to make sense of what had happened at dinner, how the story they'd told about me for years had unraveled in a single evening. When morning came, the air in the kitchen was thick with politeness. Mom was already at the stove, moving briskly, her robe cinched tight around her waist. "Coffee's ready?" she said without turning around. Dad sat at the table, his reading glasses perched low on his nose, pretending to study the paper. Lauren hadn't come downstairs yet. The silence stretched thin between the three of us. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, the steam fogging my glasses. "Sleep okay?" Mom asked finally. I nodded. "Fine." She smiled tightly, the kind of smile that only lives on the surface. Dad folded the newspaper, straightened it, and said, "You caught us off guard last night." I looked at him. "I wasn't trying to." "It felt like you were making a point," he said. I didn't answer right away. "Maybe the point made itself," I said softly. He didn't look at me again, just tapped the edge of the paper. "Well," he muttered, "it's good to see you doing well." It should have sounded kind, but it landed like a placeholder. By the time Lauren came down, she looked like she hadn't slept much either. Her hair was pinned up, her eyes tired but composed. "Morning," she said, sitting across from Dad. He gave her a warm nod, the kind he'd always reserved for her. For a few minutes we went through the motions, toast jam, coffee refills, but the words were small, almost rehearsed. When she finally spoke, it was quiet. "I didn't know you'd been working that hard," she said. "None of us did. You never asked," I said not unkindly. "I guess I didn't think I had to," she replied. "You always seemed fine." She stirred her coffee, eyes lowered. "You never made a fuss. I didn't think it would have mattered," I said. The words came out steadier than I felt. Every time I tried to talk about what I was building, it got compared to something else. Eventually, it was easier not to bring it up at all. Lauren looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time that morning. "I wasn't trying to make you feel smaller," she said. "I know," I replied, "but silence can still do that." Mom set a plate of eggs on the table, forcing a bright tone. "You two have grown into such strong women," she said. "Different but strong." Her voice wavered just slightly, the kind of crack that comes from years of holding things in. Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not dwell," he said, his fork clinking against the plate. "Thanksgiving's over. Time to move on." But I could tell by the way his hand tightened around the fork that he wasn't ready to let it go. After breakfast, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, the yard covered in a thin frost that sparkled under the early sun. I could see the imprint of my old footprints from the night before. Every corner of that house held memories, some good, some sharp, around the edges. I walked toward the garden, the one Mom used to keep full of hydrangeas, now bare and brittle. For the first time in years, I felt detached from it all, not distant, just separate. I stood there for a while, watching my breath hang in the air. Then I heard the door creak open behind me. "You're up early," Dad said, stepping onto the porch. His voice was softer now, stripped of the authority it carried at the table. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Guess I had too much on my mind." He nodded slowly. "You've changed," he said. "You're different than I remember." "Maybe I just stopped trying to fit into what you remembered," I said. He crossed his arms, staring out at the yard. "You know," he said after a moment, "when you stopped coming to family dinners, I thought you were drifting. I didn't realize you were building something. You never asked what I was doing," I said. He nodded once, still looking away. "You're right," he said quietly. "That's on me." It was strange hearing that from him, an admission small but real. He looked older in the morning light, the silver in his hair catching the sun. "You always seemed so independent," he continued. "I thought you didn't need us." I smiled faintly. "Everyone needs someone," I said. "I just learned not to depend on the people who couldn't see me." He didn't argue. He just sighed, the kind that sounded more like surrender than defeat. When I went back inside, Lauren was standing by the front window, phone in hand, eyes distant. She turned when she saw me. "Ethan's heading back early," she said. "He's got meetings." "Are you going with him?" I asked. She hesitated. "I think I'll stay one more night." Her tone carried something unspoken, like she wasn't ready to face her own reflection yet. Later, while Mom prepared lunch, Lauren wandered into the living room and sat beside me on the couch. The television was on low, a morning news anchor talking about travel delays. "Do you remember when we used to sit here and plan our Christmas lists?" she asked. I nodded. "You always went first." She smiled faintly. "You let me. Every time." I glanced at her. "I didn't let you. You just didn't wait your turn." She laughed quietly, then turned serious. "You know, last night, when you said what you did, I realized something. I've been performing for them too, just in a different way." She looked down at her hands. "The house, the job, all of it. I don't even know if I like it anymore." I studied her face. She looked smaller somehow, like the armor had slipped. "You could start over," I said softly. "People do." She gave a short laugh. "At 35. "At any age," I said. For a while, neither of us spoke. The house creaked in the quiet, the way old houses do when they're settling into silence. Finally, Lauren said, "I wish you'd told me sooner." "I tried," I said. "You just didn't hear it." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the living room again. The fire had burned low, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The old family photos on the mantel glowed in the dim light. Lauren in her cap and gown. Mom and Dad at their anniversary dinner, me at a picnic, half out of frame. I studied them for a long time before I reached up and straightened the one that always tilted to the left. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock in the hallway. I could feel the shift that had begun small, maybe fragile, but real. The next step wouldn't come from confrontation anymore. It would come from deciding how much space I still wanted to give them in the life I'd built on my own. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the porch swing against its chain. I turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under my feet. As I reached the landing, I heard Lauren's voice from her room, soft and uncertain. "Hannah." I stopped. "Yeah. Thank you," she said quietly. For saying what, I couldn't. I stood there for a moment in the dark hallway listening to the quiet that followed, then went into my room and closed the door gently behind me. The truth was out now, and no one could put it back the way it was. The next morning, the house carried a strange stillness, the kind that lingers after something unspoken has been settled but not yet healed. Mom was already gone for her church group meeting, and Dad's car was missing from the driveway. Only Lauren and I remained. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen as sunlight fell across the table, catching the faint scratches in the wood. We sat across from each other, our mugs between us, the silence softer than before. "I was thinking about what you said last night," Lauren began. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were rimmed with fatigue. "You were right. About me, about all of it." I didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, her fingers tracing circles on her mug. "When we were growing up, I never noticed how much Dad compared us. I thought he was just being proud. I didn't see how it landed on you." "It's not just you," I said quietly. "It's the whole rhythm of this family. You were the melody. I was the background noise." She gave a weak laugh, shaking her head. "You always did have a way with words." Her smile faded. "Ethan doesn't even know how much of what I do is for them, for Mom and Dad. The house, the career, all of it was about keeping up the picture. The confession hung in the air. Lauren wasn't someone who shared cracks in her armor easily. I could see the weight of pretending settling across her shoulders. "You don't have to keep doing it," I said. "You can let it go." She looked at me, searching for something, permission maybe, or proof that it was allowed. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Dad stepped inside his coat, still buttoned, a newspaper tucked under his arm. He stopped when he saw us at the table. "Morning," he said, his tone neutral. "I thought you'd both be gone by now." "We were just talking," Lauren said, "about last night." He set the paper down slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Still on that, huh?" Lauren met his gaze. "It's not something we can just brush off. It's Thanksgiving, not a board meeting," he said curtly. "Family dinners get heated. Then they end. That's how it works." "Not this time," I said quietly. He turned toward me, his expression tightening. "You made your point," he said. "There's no need to drag it out." "It's not about dragging it out," I replied. "It's about not pretending it didn't happen." For a long moment, he didn't move. The light through the window caught the lines on his face, the wear that years of control and pride had carved deep. "You think I haven't done enough for this family?" he asked suddenly, his voice low but sharp. "You think any of this came easy?" I looked at him calmly. "That's not what I said." He leaned on the counter, palms flat, his voice rising slightly. "I worked for everything you have, every opportunity. I made sure you never had to worry about a thing. And now I'm being told I wasn't enough." Lauren's voice came in softly. "Dad, that's not what she meant," but he waved her off. "No, I want to hear it from her," he said, eyes fixed on me. "You think I favored your sister?" "Maybe I did." She showed appreciation. She stayed close. I took a breath, keeping my tone even. "She didn't stay close, Dad. She stayed safe." "There's a difference." He blinked, thrown off balance. "You taught us to earn love by being useful, by being impressive. I just stopped trying to prove it." The silence that followed was thick. For the first time, I saw something flicker across his face, something between disbelief and recognition. He didn't argue. He just sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath him. Lauren's hand rested on the table. "Dad," she said softly, "we're not blaming you. We're asking you to listen." He rubbed his temples, his voice quieter now. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. "I thought I was motivating you." "Motivation doesn't sound like comparison," I said. "It sounds like trust. And you never trusted me to make my own way." He looked up, eyes tired. "Maybe I didn't," he said after a moment. "You always seemed different, hard to read." I smiled faintly. "That's because you only ever looked for what you already understood. The rest you ignored." For the first time, Dad didn't have a defense. He sat there staring at the table as the clock ticked steadily in the background. Lauren stood and walked to the sink, rinsing her mug, just to have something to do with her hands. "We're all tired," she said softly. "Maybe we should just take a break." Dad nodded slowly, his shoulders heavy. "You girls do what you need," he said, standing to leave the room. "I'm going to the garage for a bit." When he was gone, the sound of the door closing felt like a deep exhale. Lauren turned to me. "He'll come around," she said, though her voice carried doubt. "He's never been good at saying sorry." "He doesn't have to," I said quietly. "He just has to stop pretending he's never wrong." That afternoon, Mom returned from church with a pie wrapped in foil and an expression that tried too hard to be cheerful. She glanced between us, sensing the residue of the morning. "How's everyone?" she asked. "We're fine," Lauren said quickly. Mom hesitated, then nodded. "Good. I brought extra for your father's coworkers." She turned to me. "You're leaving today?" "In a bit," I said. "I've got work tomorrow." Mom's smile faltered for a heartbeat, then recovered. "You always were the practical one," she said softly. "You take after your grandfather. He built quietly, too." I paused, caught off guard by the gentleness in her tone. "I didn't know that." "He never talked about it," she said, setting the pie down, "but he was proud of it just the same." Later, as I packed my bag upstairs, Lauren knocked on the door. "You really heading out?" she asked. I nodded. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "It feels strange, doesn't it? Like everything's different now, but we don't know what to do with it." "Change always feels strange," I said. She smiled faintly. "You sound like one of those podcasts I listen to." "Maybe I missed my calling," I said. She laughed softly. "Hey," she said. After a pause, I meant what I said last night. "Thank you." We hugged, awkward at first, then real. Years of unspoken things seemed to shift between us, making space for something new. "Take care of yourself," I said. "You too," she replied. Downstairs, Mom was waiting by the door, her coat on car keys in hand. "I'll walk you out," she said. The air outside was cool. The sky washed in that pale November light that always makes everything look a little more honest. We stood on the porch for a moment before she spoke. "Your father won't admit it, but he's proud of you," she said quietly. "He's just not good at showing it." "I know," I said, "but he'll have to learn." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we all will." I hugged her, then stepped down the porch steps, the gravel crunching under my boots. As I reached my car, I looked back once more. Mom stood in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame like she was holding the house steady. For the first time, she didn't call after me. The drive home was quiet. The trees along the highway were bare, their branches stretching toward a gray sky. I thought about how strange it felt to leave without the usual weight pressing down. The house I'd built, the one they still didn't know well, waited for me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically, warm and steady. I sat there for a while, engine idling, the faint hum filling the silence. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. The framed prints, the stack of client folders, the scent of cedar and coffee. My own life, my own rhythm. I turned off the engine and sat back, watching the porch light reflect across the windshield. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for comparison. I was just home. By the time Monday rolled around, the last traces of Thanksgiving were gone. The house smelled like cinnamon and coffee again, the way it always did when I worked from home. My laptop hummed softly on the dining table beside a half-finished cup, a sign that life was already finding its rhythm again. I spent the morning catching up on client emails, scheduling campaign reviews, and updating proposals. It was quiet, simple, and mine. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Kim, one of my oldest clients. She owned a string of boutique coffee shops across the Midwest and had become one of the first people to believe in me when I went independent. "Lunch, my treat. I owe you updates and maybe a vent." I smiled and sent a quick reply. "You pick the place. I'll meet you there." We met at a small cafe downtown, one of hers, the kind with soft jazz playing low and sunlight pooling on the tables. Rachel greeted me with her usual bright grin and a tight hug. "You look good," she said, studying me. Relaxed. "Did something happen?" I laughed lightly. "Something like that." We ordered salads and coffee, and once the waiter left, she leaned in. "So Thanksgiving, how'd that go?" I hesitated, swirling my spoon in the cup. "Different," I said. For the first time, I said things I should have said years ago. Rachel's brow lifted slightly. To your family, I nodded. To my father, mostly. I told her about the dinner table, about the silence that followed, and the way the house felt different afterward, like air finally circulating in a room that had been closed too long. She listened without interrupting, her expression soft. When I finished, she leaned back. You finally let them see who you really are, she said. That's not small, Hannah. I shrugged, though her words lingered. It didn't feel like a victory, just necessary. Rachel smiled gently. Sometimes necessary is enough. When lunch ended, I headed back to my car, the winter air crisp against my face. The sky was pale and wide, the kind that hinted at snow without the promise. As I drove home, I thought about what she'd said about being seen. Maybe it wasn't about proving anything anymore. Maybe it was about being steady in my truth, even if no one else applauded. That week passed quietly. Work filled the days, and by Friday evening, I found myself on the couch reviewing a presentation. My phone buzzed again, this time a name I didn't expect. Lauren. The message was short. Can I come by this weekend? I want to talk. I stared at it for a moment, unsure what she wanted to say that couldn't fit into a phone call. Then I typed back, Sure, Saturday afternoon works. When Saturday came, the house felt different, lighter, maybe because it was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the quiet hum of music in the background. I'd learned to make the space feel alive, even on still days. At 2 o'clock sharp, her car pulled into the driveway. I opened the door before she could knock. She stood there in a long wool coat, her hands tucked into her pockets. Nice place, she said softly as she stepped inside. You didn't exaggerate. I smiled. I don't post much about it. She looked around, taking in the tall windows, the soft light, the framed photos on the walls. You built this yourself, she said. Every bit of it. I nodded, one piece at a time. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd refinished myself the summer before. For a few minutes, she looked at her hands, twisting her wedding ring slowly. Things at home are rough, she said finally. After you left, Dad's been quiet. Mom's trying to keep him busy, but I can tell it's getting to him. And you? I asked. How are you holding up? She laughed softly without humor. I'm not sure. Ethan and I have been arguing more. About money, about priorities. He thinks I should stay focused on what's practical. He doesn't understand that practical isn't always peaceful. Her words landed somewhere deep. I waited. She looked around again, her eyes landing on a small framed photo near the counter, one of me standing in front of my porch hammer in hand, grinning. You seem happy, she said. I didn't think you'd be the one to find that first. I met her gaze, gentle but honest. It's not about finding it. It's about protecting it. She nodded slowly. I get that now. We talked for hours about work, family, and all the little things that had gone unsaid for years. She told me how hard it had been to face the truth after Thanksgiving, how Mom had cried in the laundry room when she thought no one was looking. She admitted she'd spent years trying to be what Dad needed, not what she wanted. I used to think being the favorite meant being loved, she said. Now I think it just meant being useful. It was a quiet kind of confession, one that didn't ask for forgiveness, just acknowledgement. You're allowed to want something different, I said softly, even if it means stepping off the pedestal. She looked at me, tears threatening, but held back. I don't even know who I am without it, she said. You'll figure it out, I told her, but this time, make sure it's for you. When she left that evening, she hugged me longer than she ever had before. At the door, she whispered, I'm proud of you. I smiled faintly. I'm proud of you too. As her car disappeared down the street, I stood on the porch for a long moment, watching the headlights fade into the dusk. Later that night, as I settled onto the couch, I noticed my phone buzzing again. It was Mom this time. The message was short, but unexpected. Dinner soon. Just you and me. I stared at it for a moment before typing back, I'd like that. The next evening, we met at a small restaurant halfway between our towns. The lighting was dim, the tables close enough for conversation without eavesdropping. Mom looked tired but softer somehow, her usual careful polish replaced by something more human. When the waiter left us with our drinks, she sighed. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. For a lot of years, I didn't notice things I should have. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet." Her voice wavered, and for a moment she looked almost fragile. "You were always the calm one," she continued. "I mistook that for contentment. I didn't see how hard you were working just to stay afloat." I reached across the table, resting my hand on hers. "You don't have to explain," I said. "We can start from here." She smiled weakly, eyes glistening. "Your father won't say it, but he's been quieter. I think he's realizing how much space his words used to take up." We ate slowly, the conversation meandering between memories and small talk. For the first time in years, it felt like two adults talking, not a mother trying to manage or a daughter trying to prove. When dinner ended, she hugged me tight before leaving her perfume familiar and warm. Driving home that night, the roads were nearly empty. The streetlights glowed against the damp pavement, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, stillness that didn't feel lonely. As I turned into my driveway, my phone buzzed once more, a new message from Dad. Just 4 words. "Proud of you, kid." I sat there for a long time, staring at it, the light from the screen glowing in the dark. No grand apology, no speech, just a small crack in the wall that had stood between us for years. And somehow that was enough for now. For a few weeks, things settled into something that almost felt normal. Work was steady, the house stayed quiet, and the calls from my parents became brief but civil. Sometimes Mom would send short updates, new recipes she was trying, photos of the backyard after the first snowfall, the kind of messages that didn't need a response but felt like olive branches. Dad didn't text again after that single message. "Proud of you, kid," but the silence carried a different weight, now less dismissal, more pause. One cold Friday evening, I was preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Lauren stood there bundled in a coat, cheeks pink from the wind. "I was nearby," she said with a small smile. "I thought I'd take a chance." I stepped aside. "You always did have good timing." She slipped inside, taking in the smell of roasted vegetables and garlic. "You cook now," she teased, hanging her scarf by the door. "Don't sound so surprised," I said. "Turns out feeding yourself isn't that hard once no one's judging your portions." We both laughed, and the air between us felt easier than it had in years. She sat at the kitchen island while I finished stirring the sauce. "Dad's been quieter," she said, resting her chin on her hand. "I think he's finally realizing he can't steer every conversation." "And Mom?" I asked. "Trying to make peace," she said softly. She even told him to stop interrupting her. "You'd have been proud." I smiled, imagining the scene. "Small miracles," I said. After dinner, we lingered in the living room, the fireplace crackling low. Lauren looked around the house again, her gaze landing on the framed certificates from my clients. "You've really built something, Hannah," she said quietly. "No one in our family's ever done this on their own, I mean." "You could too," I said. "You've got everything you need." She shook her head. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. The job, the house, even my marriage, they're all built on what I thought I was supposed to want. But when I see how you live, how grounded you seem, I realize I don't know what I actually want anymore." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured her another cup of tea and handed it to her. "Maybe that's the first step," I said. "Admitting you don't have to keep performing." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the mug. "Ethan wouldn't understand," she said. "He thinks reflection means weakness." The room went quiet except for the sound of the fire popping. "Finally," she said, "I envy your peace. I used to think independence looked lonely, but now I see it's just free." Her voice broke slightly, and before she could look away, I reached across the coffee table and took her hand. "It's not too late to find your own version," I said. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said, "but it's possible." We sat like that for a while, two sisters who had spent most of their lives orbiting the same family, but never quite meeting in the middle. When she finally stood to leave, the clock read past midnight. At the door, she hugged me tightly. "I'm going to start figuring it out," she whispered. "For me this time." "You'll be fine," I said. "You're stronger than you think." After she left, I stood at the window watching her taillights disappear into the distance. The road glistened under the streetlight thin trails of frost catching the glow. I hadn't realized how much I'd needed that moment, quiet proof that truth could shift things even gently. The next morning I woke to another message, this one from Mom. "Family dinner Sunday, just us. no pressure. I hesitated before typing back, "Okay, I'll be there." Sunday came cold and gray. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed something small but striking. The front porch light was on, even though it was the middle of the day. Mom had always turned it off by habit, saying electricity shouldn't go to waste. Maybe this was her way of saying, "You're welcome here." Inside, the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. The table was set simply without the usual formality. No crystal glasses, no linen napkins, just warmth. "You came," Mom said, her smile tentative but genuine. Dad looked up from the carving knife and nodded once. "Glad you're here." Dinner started quietly. There were no grand announcements, no comparisons, no small jabs hidden in questions, just conversation, the kind that flowed like water instead of marching through rehearsed lines. Mom asked about my work. Dad listened without interrupting. At one point, he even asked, "So what's next for you?" And for once, it sounded like curiosity, not competition. "I've been thinking about expanding," I said. "Maybe hiring a second consultant. I'm not in a rush, but it's time." He nodded thoughtfully. "You'd be good at that. Leadership suits you." The words startled me not because of what he said, but because of how simple they sounded. When dinner ended, Mom poured tea while Dad disappeared into his study. She sat beside me at the table, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "He's trying," she said quietly. "You probably won't hear him say much, but he's trying." I nodded, taking a sip of tea. "That's all I need," I said. She reached over and placed her hand on mine. "You've always had more grace than any of us deserved." I smiled faintly. Maybe I just had more practice. Before I left that night, Dad walked me to the door. The air outside was cold and sharp. "You did good, Hannah," he said, his voice rough with something close to humility. "I didn't make it easy, but you held your own. You taught me how," I said. He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "Guess I did." For a brief moment, the years between us didn't feel so heavy. Driving home, I thought about how quiet change could be. It didn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it came like a soft knock on the door, a sister showing up unannounced, a mother finally listening, a father admitting his pride in fewer words than a full sentence. When I reached my house, snow had started to fall slow and steady. I left the porch light on as I went inside, letting its glow spill onto the steps. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was building a life apart from my family. I was simply living one on my own terms. And deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished yet. Something was still shifting, waiting quietly on the horizon. Winter came slowly that year, soft and steady, like the kind of forgiveness that doesn't need an announcement. My work schedule stayed full, and life found its rhythm again: coffee in the morning, client calls by noon, quiet dinners by candlelight. But somewhere between the normal days, I began to notice how different everything felt. There wasn't tension in my shoulders anymore when the phone rang. There wasn't that ache in my chest when family came up in conversation. The air had changed, and so had I. A week before Christmas, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name in my father's handwriting, sharp, careful, unmistakable. Inside was a simple card with a winter landscape on the front. The message inside was short. Dinner on Christmas Eve. Just family. No expectations. I held the card for a long time, letting those last two words sink in. No expectations. For the first time, that sounded like peace. When Christmas Eve came, I drove through the light snow that dusted the highway headlights, cutting through the flakes. The house looked the same from the outside, but the porch light was on again, glowing warm against the gray sky. When I stepped inside, the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. Mom was by the fireplace, humming softly as she adjusted the stockings. She looked up, her smile small but steady. "You made it," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied. Lauren and Ethan arrived soon after, carrying a casserole and a tray of cookies. The greetings were gentle, no forced cheer, no spotlight on anyone's success. We all moved around each other easily, like people who had finally stopped keeping score. Dad stood by the window, watching the snow fall. When he turned, he gave me a nod and said quietly, "Good to see you, Hannah." I smiled. "You too, Dad." That was all we needed. Dinner was simple, but it felt different. The conversation flowed without sharp edges. There were stories, laughter that came easily, and moments of quiet that didn't feel heavy. When dessert came, Mom brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. It was filled with pictures from birthdays, road trips, and small moments we'd all forgotten. One photo caught my eye, me and Lauren sitting on the porch steps barefoot holding melting popsicles. I remembered that day. We'd spent the afternoon drawing on the sidewalk while Dad worked in the garage. Lauren reached over, touching the picture lightly. "We were happy then," she said softly. "We still can be," I answered. Later, after the dishes were washed and the lights dimmed, Dad walked me to the door. The night was still, the snow falling slower now. "You were right, he said quietly, about how I saw things. I thought I was helping, but I was measuring." His voice broke just a little. "I don't want to do that anymore." I looked at him, older, tired, but trying. "Then don't," I said. "We can start fresh." He nodded, the kind of nod that said he meant it. "Merry Christmas, kid." "Merry Christmas, Dad." Driving home, the sky cleared enough for stars to break through. The road shimmered under the moonlight, and for the first time in years, the silence in the car felt comforting. There was no score to settle, no script to rewrite, just the quiet certainty that I'd done what I needed to do, not to prove a point, but to free myself from the need to. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. I stood for a moment before going inside, watching the snow settle on the roof, soft and even. The house I built, every beam, every piece of it stood as proof that peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself every single day. That night before bed, I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the snow fall over the yard. The world outside was still and silver, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I thought about the years I'd spent waiting for someone else to recognize my worth, and how it finally happened the moment I stopped needing them to. Life has a way of circling back softer the second time around. My family wasn't perfect now, but we were learning how to listen, how to speak without comparison, how to stay. And maybe that was enough. Before I turned off the light, I whispered a small thank you to the silence, to the lessons, to the version of me who had once believed she'd never be seen. She'd made it here one boundary at a time, and in the end, she'd found something better than approval. She'd found peace. If you've ever felt invisible, I hope you remember this: being unseen doesn't mean you aren't worthy. Sometimes it just means you're becoming someone they'll have to see differently. And if this story touched you, take a moment to share it, or simply hold it close. You never know whose quiet strength might be waiting for its turn to be recognized.